really big room. And I see a lot of empty seats, so I'm going to pretend I'm a professor, and I'm going to ask everybody in the back to please relocate yourself a little bit closer. Let's make it feel a little bit warmer and inviting. Perfect, thank you very much. I took off my coat because I got warm at the last signing, and now I'm freezing again. All right, well, thank you very much for joining us today. This is the solo panel for producer Tomohiko Ishii, all about producing. And so without further ado, let me introduce Mr. Ishii.
Hello. I'm Tomohiko Ishii. I'm a producer of Eden of the East and 009 Recyborg. That is our feature film. Now I'm learning English. And for 6 months, there are good English conversation internet service. It's with the Skype. We can connect to the Philippine teacher in the midnight Japan. So I learn English every day for this event. So now I want to try to talk with English, but it's very bad. So please help me.
I'll be his support more than interpreter this time.
No. Okay, so I began my job 1999. I joined in Studio Ghibli, and my first project is Spirited Away, and next is Howl's Moving Castle, and Cat's Returns, and Tales from Earthy, blah blah blah, something like that. So my producer's boss is Mr. Suzuki. So he is, I think, the best producer in Japan. So he told me about producers. Very important thing is the word.
Words.
Words.
Individual words.
Individual words. For example, my boss, Mr. Suzuki, said, director is criminal, and producer is a detective. And every director is criminal. So they made good story and good character and good visual, but they want to tell another thing and about his own. 言いたいのは表面的な物語とかじゃなくて、監督は必ず作品の中に違うものを隠している。
So what he's trying to elaborate on is, even though the director produces things on the surface, there's actually a hidden story that most directors want to convey, a hidden meaning, an ulterior motive, perhaps.
For example, in Spirited Away, and when Hayao Miyazaki finished storyboards, Mr. Suzuki said to me, "Who is the hero in this film?" he asked. So I thought heroine is Chihiro. So have you seen Spirited Away? Okay.
Raise your hands.
Good.
Wow.
So I want to ask, all of you. So who is the hero of Spirited Away? So,
Does anybody know who the hero is in Spirited Away?
Chihiro and
So Chihiro is the heroine.
yeah.
Who might be the hero? Haku?
Yeah, I answered Haku. But Mr. Suzuki said no. So you should answer every character in this field. And so I counted every characters. And Mr. Suzuki said, 一番登場するキャラクターがその作品の主役だ。
So what he said was the character that appears the most in the film is actually the hero.
And first was Chihiro.
And first was Chihiro.
But second was not Haku. Second was Kaonashi.
The second was the faceless, right, the Kaonashi.
Yes, so Suzuki-san said, Kaonashi is Mr. Miyazaki. But he 気づかれたくないので、
But he doesn't want that to be realized.
ハクというハンサムな男の子をわざと登場させた。
And for that reason, he added Haku in there to kind of mask the fact that.
And second question from Mr. Suzuki. So he said, ハクと千尋が出会うポイントを全て洗い出したんです。
So I was told to search and find all of the points at which Haku and Chihiro meet.
数えたら全部で6ポイントありました。
And so after I counted all of them, I came up with 6 points.
まず最初のポイントは、ユアという千尋が迷い込む大きな建物。そこに向けて千尋とハクが息をつめて歩いていくときに、この橋のところに立ってた。
The first point was when Haku and Chihiro were walking toward the Yuya, the bathhouse, and they were going to cross this bridge, and they were holding their breath at the beginning. And if you actually look off to the side, there's a kaonashi there.
This is the first point. And second point is next day's morning, Chihiro wanted to meet her parents and change to pig. So in the bridge, Kaonashi is standing, and Chihiro walks through front of the Kaonashi. So Kaonashi が立っていくと、千尋が頭を下げる。Kaonashi.
So when she was passing right in front of the kaonashi, she actually ended up lowering her head when she passed in front of it.
And 3つ目のポイントは、千尋がその岩で働くことになって雨が降った。
And so the third point is when it started raining, after she started working at the bathhouse, it started raining outside.
でこう扉外をこう開けて雑巾を絞っていくと、そこで雨に濡れて顔出しが立っている。
So the third point was, she was working in there and she ended up sliding open the doors, and then she was wringing out some rags, and when she looked up, there was a kaonashi right outside.
で千尋は、顔出しを中に入れた。
And so she let the kaonashi come inside.
で4番目は千尋が神様がやってくるお風呂を掃除したの。掃除するためにその薬のお湯が出るその札が必要なの。その札を千尋が意地悪にもらえないの。顔なしが取ってきた。で千尋はすごく喜ぶ。ありがとう。
So the fourth point is when she's having to clean out the bath. There's a special, basically, cleaning chemicals, if you will, right, that they need to be able to buy, but they need money to be able to buy it. And she was being picked on, so she didn't really have any money. And the kaonashi actually went and retrieved money for her and gave her money. And she was very grateful and thanked him.
で、5ポイントですね。顔なしは千尋が喜んでくれたので、手からいっぱいその金を出して、千尋が喜んでくれた。
And since she was so happy from receiving the tokens from the Kaonashi, said he put out his hands and produced a lot of gold to give her.
で千尋がその時どうしたか皆さん覚えてますか？
Do you remember what Chihiro did at that point?
She refused.
She refused.
Yeah, that's right. And 6 point, 顔なしは千尋を食べようとする。
And the sixth point is actually when the Kaonashi later on in the film tries to eat Chihiro.
Mr. Suzuki said to me, "What do you think about Kaonashi?" So I couldn't answer. So Mr. Suzuki said, "This is stalker." So, but 宮崎駿監督は当時でその日本の風潮をすごく嫌がってて、昔は誰か好きな女の子ができると、その女の子の家の前に立って彼女が出てくるのを待ってました。だけど結局彼女は自分のことが好きになってくれなくて、例えばその家のお父さんとちょっと宮崎さんにいわゆる男。
So there was a period where in Japan, say a guy would start to like in a one-way direction a female, and he might follow her home and stand outside the house and kind of hope that she would come out and eventually start to like him, and it didn't happen. So then ultimately that person would try to become friends with maybe that girl's father.
So Miyazaki-san said, "This is pure love." But now, so everything すべてにその病名をつけちゃう。ストーカーとか、うつ病とか、精神的なうつ病とか、どんどんつけちゃう。
So he said, even though this belief is more of a pure love, what happens in society is people give those illness names or conditions, or this person is a stalker, this person is schizophrenic, this person has multiple personalities, those types of illness, they categorize it as an illness.
でこれからその日本と世界はどんどんそうやってひどいことになる。
And so, if this continues, that the world's just going to continue to become a worse and worse place.
で宮崎監督が描きたかったのは、実は千尋と白のラブストーリーではなくて、そのみんなが本当は持ってるんだけど、いろんなその管理社会によってそれが押し殺されてしまっているピュアな部分を描きたかった。
So what he was trying to do is illustrate more, not necessarily a love story between Haku and Chihiro, but more of just pure love in society today, something that's not suppressed by other items.
で鈴木敏夫さんプロデューサーはプロモーションの中心を白と千尋のラブストーリーに向けて顔なしと千尋のその心の物語にしようというふうに言いました。
And so producer Suzuki decided that the right way to advertise this, to promote this, was not as a love story between Chihiro and Haku, but rather a more true heart-to-heart connection between the Kaonashi and Chihiro.
その時に一番最初の話に戻りますけど、鈴木敏夫さんがその作ったコピーというのがみんなの中に顔なしはいる。
And so the first, when Suzuki thought of the right tagline, the right copy phrase to use for this film, it was everyone has a Kaonashi inside them.
でもし千と千尋の神隠しを千尋と白のラブストーリーって言いましたから多分若い人しか見に来てこなかったと思うんだけどもその白と千尋のやはり心の物語ってことにしたので日本ではもう若い人からおじいちゃんおばあちゃんみんなが見に来てきた。
And because it wasn't advertised as a love story between Chihiro and Haku, and they felt if they did that, it would really just attract children to the show. But by making it more of a heart-to-heart connection, they were able to attract a very wide audience, not just young, but also all ages.
プロデューサーの仕事というのはその監督がやろうとしていることの表面的なこと、そしてその下にあるこの2つをちゃんと見つけて、それをちゃんと言葉にしてお客さんに伝えることが非常に大きい。
So I think what this really means is if I go back to kind of the beginning, right? the important point is to interpret what the director is really trying to say, and to be able to communicate not only what you see on the surface, but really what the hidden meaning is below. And that's really kind of the function of the producer.
もう一つ例を挙げると、so I want to explain another case over Miyazaki-san and Mr. Takahata. Mr. Takahata is a director over My Neighbor's Your Mother and
Grave of the Firefly.
Grave of Firefly. But he was a great producer. So in the Nausicaa Valley of the Winds, and director is Miyazaki-san, the producer was Takahata-san. So, and that time, and in Nausicaa, Miyazaki-san was not popular. For example, 宇宙戦艦ヤマトとか、あとはガンダムとか、どちらかというと、いわゆる男性中心の宇宙を舞台にしたロボットものみたいな意味がすごく人気だったでしょう。
So at the time, what was most popular was shows like Space Battleship Yamato, here is on TV as Star Blazers, or shows like Gundam, things that really focused on a male audience with some type of an action in space.
高畑さんと宮崎さんはそういうアニメばっかり流行ってるから、そろそろお客さんは違うものを見たいんじゃないかというふうに考えてます。
And so both Miyazaki and Takahata thought, you know, this has been popular for a while now. I think it's probably about time that boom ends and we move on to something else.
でそれまでに見たことがないナウシカの設定として、まず一つ、主人公が男性ではなく女性である。
And so one of the big unique aspects that Nausicaa brought to the industry was really that the main character was not a male, but a young female.
でそれまでのいわゆる SF 映画というのは、主人公が相手を倒す、攻撃する、最終的には悪を打ち倒すっていう話が主流だった。
Yeah, so the mainstream motive, right, motif in most of the anime at the time was to have the male hero of the show, the main character, really just attack and defeat the enemy.
でナウシカは一回も自分から攻撃はしないんです。
And so if you watch Nausicaa, she never really attacks once from herself.
トリメキア軍が攻めてきた。巨神兵が攻めてきたときに村の人を守るために初めて戦う。
And so really she defends herself ultimately when the Tormekians attack and the, what do they call them, the god creatures, god soldiers come and attack. Then for the first time she has to defend herself and her town.
あとはその当時のいわゆるファンタジーとか SF というのはすごくいわゆるスター・ウォーズ的な世界。
And so, you know, the science fiction at that time was really kind of focused around the whole Star Wars theme.
で宮崎駿監督が「風の谷のナウシカ」で舞台にしたところは日本の南の方にある白島、昔からある木々がまだ残ってる島、木々、ウルトムです。
So he one of the things he wanted to focus the plot on, Miyazaki did, was on a particular type of tree that's been around, a wooded area called Yakushima in the southern part of Japan. That's been around for ages and ages and ages.
ハードな SF ではなくて非常にオーガニックな世界を舞台にすることでそれまで作られてきた作品とそれを使われていました。
So not a very hard or sharp or angular type of science fiction, but more of an organic science fiction plot was what he was really going for.
And third point, so can I?
Of course.
I'm going to try. So I want to tell you about Nausicaa's last scene. So in the last scene in Nausicaa, many Howl is running from the east and カートが来ます。最後ナウシカが跳ねられて倒れて蘇るじゃないですか。最初の宮崎さんのシナリオはナウシカが立ってます。で音が来ます。ダーッと来てピタッと止まる。The end.
So at the very last scene, the Ohm are coming from the east, right? And they all rush and they swarm basically over Nausicaa, and she gets hit and thrown into the air, right? The original idea was that she would be standing solid and the Ohm would run right to her feet and then end up stopping still.
で当時まだプロデューサーじゃなかった鈴木敏夫さんはこの終わり方はあまりにも突然すぎんじゃないか
And so at the time, Mr. Suzuki, who wasn't yet a producer, he said, you know, it's a little abrupt. The ending is maybe just a little too abrupt, don't you think?
高畑さんは3つ選択肢があるんです。
And so Mr. Takahata said that we have three choices.
一つはナウシカの前でオウムが止まって終わる今のパターン。
So one is the current pattern. The Ohm march right up to Nausicaa's feet and stop, and then it's over.
二つ目はオウムにナウシカが跳ねられる死ぬ。これはパターン。
The second pattern would be that the Nausicaa's standing there and she gets plowed over by the Ohm and she dies. Yeah.
3番目はナウシカがオウムに跳ねられるのを控える。
And the third pattern was, okay, so the Ohm come and they plow her over and she, I guess, dies or whatever, but she comes back.
で高畑プロデューサーはどっちがいいですかって聞いた。
And so Mr. Takahata asked, which do you think is best?
鈴木さんは控えた方がいいですね。
He said, I think the revival, the return, coming back to life is the right choice, is what Mr. Suzuki said.
で高畑プロデューサーは宮崎監督に死んで光りましょうって言ったら宮崎さんはシナリオを書き直したそうです。
And so Mr. Takahata took that idea and discussed with Mr. Miyazaki, and they ended up rewriting the end to meet that ending.
こういうふうにプロデューサーというのは監督と一緒にお客さんに一体何を伝えるのかということをまず言葉にするということと。
So, the producer, again, let me just again reiterate here, is one of the important things is to work with the director very closely and really determine the right messaging. What are we really trying to communicate?
最終的にお客さんがどうやったら一番喜ぶのかということを一番最初のお客として見るというのが非常に重要。
So, it's a very critical role for us as kind of the first consumer to watch it and understand, and how does this appease us? How does this make us feel when we watch this?
じゃあ次に僕らの仕事の話をしたいと思います。
So, next I'd like to move on to kind of how I work and what I'm doing.
東のエデンという作品についてお話をしたいと思いますけど。
So I think I'd like to talk a little bit about Eden of the East.
当時アメリカで発生した9/11が起こってでその前に冷戦が崩壊してでいろんな物語が正義の味方が一体何と戦ったらいいのかっていうことを見失っていた時代だったんですね。
So, setting this after 9/11, right, and after the whole Soviet Union is broken up, a lot of change in the world, and the question was really, what is justice? What is the right thing to fight for? And I think it's a story of, it's about people losing that vision.
まず僕と神山監督はじゃあ今この瞬間に何を敵にすべきかということをずっと話し合いました。
And so I thought with Mr. Kamiyama, and we discussed with each other, what is the appropriate enemy, if you were?
ずっと話をしているときにパンと出てきたのが今戦うべきものは空気なんだよねという話をしました。
And so we thought, after much discussion, maybe what we really need to fight against is this atmosphere, this forlornness.
なぜかというと9.11 という大きな事件があったにもかかわらずなんとなくいつの間にかそのことは忘れたことになってしまってことは過ぎてしまいました。しかも当時の日本は経済的には非常に厳しい状態だったけどいまだにそのバブルで描かれた時の気分を引きずっていこうとしている。
And part of the reason for that is, is unfortunate it is to say, even after 9/11, a lot of people lost awareness, almost forgot about a lot of those happenings, and also even if you consider Japan and the economic boom that they had and when the bubble broke, a lot of people honestly still are clinging to a lot of those ideals. They're not moving on.
日本には水に流すっていう言葉があります。
So in Japan, there's an expression that means to let flow with the water.
すごくいい言葉なんですけど、悪く言えば何か大事なことがあってもそれをすぐ忘れてしまうっていうのが日本人の特徴です。
It's a very nice phrase, but it also describes the Japanese mentality a little bit in that let bygones be bygones and kind of almost forget about things like that.
多分他の国と違って四季がはっきりしていたりとか木で作られた文化なので、ある程度時間が経つと木が腐ってしまうので、また新たに作り直すということをずっとやってきた民族なので、日本人は石とか鉄とか残るものを作ってきたヨーロッパとかアメリカとかと違ってその全てをいいことも悪いことも全部忘れてしまうっていうことが認めされている。
Yeah, so I can even raise an example of in Europe and America and so forth. A lot of even the construction materials used are stone and concrete and things that just won't erode nearly as easy as in Japan. If you look, many of the structures were built with woods. And so things after a certain amount of time need to be rebuilt and redone and recreated. And so again, it links back to this whole idea of experiencing it and then letting it go and moving on to the next item.
仮にそういった日本に対して怒っている人間がいたとして、
So consider for a moment if there was an individual that was very upset with that way of thinking.
その何者かが日本人の目を覚まさせようとしたらどうするかっていう話の中から東エデンの物語が始まる何日か前に東京に11発のミサイルが落ちます。
So imagine that before this person can act on any types of actions to maybe change that Japan itself is attacked by 11 missiles.
それでもなんとなく日本人はそのことを忘れてはいないけれども、なんとかなかったことにして暮らしているというのが東エデンの第一話です。
And then that despite the fact that they were attacked by 11 missiles, that most of the populace in Japan almost seemed to get over it really quick and forget that it even happened. And really that's kind of the story outline for the first episode of Eden of the East.
ヒロインのサキという女の子は本当にこんなことでいいんだろうかっていうふうに思って、ちょっとこれもおかしな話なんですけど、彼女が世界の中心だと思っているアメリカのワシントンのホワイトハウスに行って、ちょっとしたそのテロリズムでしょ。そこで彼女が思いついたのがホワイトハウスにコインを投げ込む。
And so, the heroine of the story, her name is Saki, and let's say that, it's a little bit of an odd story, but she believes that the White House is kind of the center of the world, and they're somehow responsible for this. And so she's upset and travels to Washington and decides to do her own type of, let's call it terrorism, some small act of terrorism. And what she thinks of is to take a coin standing in front of the White House and throw it at the White House.
これがその映画とか物語を作るときのポイントで、その今世界で起きていることで当たり前とされてるけども、ちょっとこれ違うんじゃないかなみたいなことを監督もプロデューサーもお客さんに言いたい。
And so this is an important point in the making of movies, and is to think, there's a situation in reality that's very close to maybe this type of situation, but there's something still wrong with it. There's something different, and it's really conveying that thought to the audience that's important.
それを伝えるためにどういったシチュエーションを作った方がいいのかっていうことからまず映画作りが始まる。それが先ほど言ったミサイルが落ちたけどみんな忘れてしまう。さらに言うとキャラクターがその出来事に対してどう思ったのか。で当然日本人全体がもうそれでいいんだと思ってるんだとしたら物語の主人公になるべきキャラクターはいやちょっとそれは違うんじゃないかなと思ってる子が登場した方が当然お客さんには物が伝わりやすい。
And so, the fact that there were 11 missiles that fell, that's obviously an important point that somebody thinks that that's wrong, and to consider the character's thought processes, and to consider that there's a character in the story that can empathize with the audience more. These are all kind of important facts in tying things together and trying to create a believable story that the audience can connect with.
で次に必要なのはどれだけお客さんにそれを楽しんで見てもらえるかです。
And the next important point is really to consider in this portrayal, what is the optimal way to make the audience have maximum enjoyment from the film?
で神山監督と僕の間でよく出たタイトルが大きく3つありました。
And so there are three kind of titles that we came up with between director Kamiyama and myself.
一つが24です。
One was 24.
とにかくもう毎話次はどうなるかもわからない。
Yeah, so each episode to really not understand what's going to happen next, kind of keep you on the edge of your seat.
で2つ目が Born Identity。
And the second one was really born identity.
主人公が記憶を失っている。
Yeah, the main character lost their memory, lost their sense of identity.
しかもほぼ、ね、全裸で海に投げ出されて。
Right, and they awake basically almost naked themselves floating in the ocean.
で3つ目はデスノートです。
The third one is Death Note.
自分の名前書いた名前が死んじゃうんですよ。
And so, you can kind of write the name of the person you want dead on a sheet of paper and then they die.
でこういったその面白い作品から何を借りてこようかって話をする中で、
And so we thought, among these three films, what parts can we borrow and use, leverage in creating a new story?
神山監督がある日ファッション雑誌を持っていました。
So one day, Director Kamiyama showed up with a fashion magazine.
そのファッションマガジンの中にバーチェっていうお金持ちが使う携帯電話を持ってたんです。
And so inside there was a picture of what's called a bache, which is apparently a cell phone or a mobile phone that the very, very wealthy would use.
その携帯の電話だけで500万円から2000万円ぐらいです。
So that phone alone can range in price anywhere from $50,000 to $200,000. Like ridiculously expensive.
その携帯にはコンシェルジュボタンがついていて、そのコンシェルジュボタンを押して電話をかけると、例えばエリザベス女王と食事をしたい。本当にお金を払うから、エリザベス女王の晩餐会に出席させてくれたりする。サービスがあるんですよ。
So and on this phone, there's a button that's called concierge. And when they push that button, let's say, for example, that they want to have a meal with Queen Elizabeth, and they request this, if they have the money, they can pay for it, and it'll be arranged that they can maybe be invited to a banquet with Queen Elizabeth in real life.
これ使おうって話なんですよ。
So he said, that's a clever idea, let's borrow that.
ノベルス携帯という携帯電話の中に100億円の電子マネーがチャージされていて、その100億円を使って日本を救った人が勝ち、でも救えなかった残りの人は負ける。携帯電話デスノートを作る。
And so what we did is we kind of turned the cell phone, this noblest cell phone, into a device that's charged with 100 million yen, I think. So, and with that, it becomes a game of if you can save the country with this much money, great. If not, then game over. And effectively using a phone as a death note.
でこのようにその最初にまず言いたいことがある。その言いたいことをお客さんにどう伝えるかっていうふうになった場合に、普通にただ言うだけでお客さんは面白いと思ってくれないですから、それをこう伝えるための何かこう面白い設定を思いつくっていうことが非常に大事です。
And so, in any type of filmmaking or story, rather than just directly telling somebody what you're trying to say, it's much more interesting to create the right setting, the right environment, and to show them rather than just tell them.
これがまずそのプロデューサーと監督が一番最初にすべきまずファーストポイントですね。
And this is probably one of the key first points that the producer and the director need to work on together.
で次にもう少し具体的なプロデューサーの仕事をご説明すると、まずアニメーションを作るにはですね、お金が必要です。
Of course, there's also one other very, very important aspect to making anime, and that is you need money.
で当然僕らはお金持ってないですから。
It's not like I'm Mr. Moneybags, so
背広を僕その日だけは着て、で髪もちゃんときれいにして、お金を持ってるいろんな会社の偉い人に会いに行くんです。
of course, I don my suit, dust it off, put on my tie, slick back my hair, And that's when I start to go visit people with money.
大体大きな会社の偉い人って最近は少し違うんですけど、アニメとか漫画読まないんですよ。
And you know, maybe it's changed more recently, but I can say as a generalization that pretty much all top executives at really large firms don't really pay any attention to anime or manga.
そしてキャラクターが可愛いんです。これが燃えるんです。
But they do look at a character and they say, oh, she's cute, or wow, nice.
そうすると必要なのはさっき僕が言った今日本はこうなってますね。でこういう日本に対してこういうことを言ったら面白いんじゃないかっていうふうに言うと偉い人たちはそういうところが興味を持つんですよ。
And so that's a good entry point. And after they've taken an interest in a visual, that's when I'll explain that, hey, you know, today our world is really like this. And wouldn't it be interesting if we can communicate to the public this type of a message? And in that strategy, they take a deep interest.
でさらにお金持ってる人は当然お金損したくないですからなるべくそのリスクを犯したくないんですよ。
And of course, even though they're very, very wealthy, they don't want to lose money either. So they try to pay very careful attention to the amount of risk involved.
なので今回僕らが作ろうとしている作品はアニメ版の24ですよ。
And so what we do is we say, this work that we're making right now, this is the anime version of 24.
Born Identity.
Or Born Identity.
そうするとお金持ってる人たちはああだったらやってもいいかもなって思ってるんですけど。
And so those potential sponsors, obviously they know of those big Hollywood hits or American hits. Like, that just might work.
もうみんなの気が変わらないうちにすぐ僕は契約書を作ります。
And before they're able to think harder and change their mind, I whip out the contract.
振込先と振込の期日も書いてます。
And of course, there's always deposit account numbers listed immediately.
お金がある程度集まるってことが分かったら、今度は予算表っていうのをまず作るんですよね。
And after I've kind of made sure that we're going to be able to get sufficient resources, whatever that number ends up being, that's when I start to put together a real budget.
スケジュールを決めて、このスタッフにこれぐらいのお金、このスタッフにこれぐらいのお金、このスタッフにこれぐらいのお金と大体全部入れてます。
And so obviously you have to build a staff list. And then you have to kind of decide a general ballpark figure to say, okay, well, this group's going to, well, can apportion this much money to this group, and this much to this other group, and this much to some other group. And so I build the schedule out both at the number of people and the amount of time.
監督が作りたい、全部やりたいようにスタッフがいると、大体3倍から4倍ぐらいになっちゃうんですね。
But if we were to say, listen to just the director's whims, of course it would probably be 3 or 4 times the number.
それを予算の中でギリギリ収まるぐらいまで一個ずつ作っています。
And so one of my functions and roles is to make sure that we stay within budget. And so I have to make some really tough decisions sometimes and shave off bits and pieces or people's or staff here and there to fit within the goal.
で、僕の一番大事なものはこれです。
And probably one of the most valuable things I possess is right here.
この中に日本中のとにかく上手なアニメーションスタッフの電話番号が全部入ってます。
And so what this really is my connection to many, many super creative and talented individuals in the animation industry in Japan.
でひたすら来てほしいスタッフに電話をして会いに行ってで、みんな忙しいしみんなこうちゃんと内容を理解してくれる時間がないのでさっきと同じことをします。24なんですよ。ボアアイデンティティなんですよ。どんどん伝える。
And so, of course, they're all very busy with their own jobs, whatever they're working on at the moment too, but I need to call them religiously and track them down and go meet them. And what do I do when I finally get the opportunity to meet these people that I really, really, really want on my team? We're going to make the next 24. We're going to make the next Born Identity. Come on, you're on board, right? And convince them.
で、大体東のエデンだと800人 ぐらいですかねのスタッフを集めて彼らと一緒に作品を作る。
And so, in the case of In of the East, it's probably around 800 staff that I gathered to create that work.
で次に僕の仕事はプロモーションですね。
And once I've done that, the next big step is to move on to promotion.
でプロモーションするときも必ず原点に立ち返ります。監督と僕らは一体お客さんに何を言いたかった。
So the first thing we do is we have to go back to the beginning. We have to again reevaluate what is the key message. What are we really trying to convey?
でそれを伝えるためには一体どういうポスタービジュアルがいいのか、どういったトレーラーがいいのか、でどういったそのコピーがいいのかということを全部作って。
And so the next step is really to start thinking about, well, what's the right approach for the posters or the trailers, the catchphrases? What are the right choices there? So think about that.
で今日その皆さんに一番お伝えしたかったことはアニメーション、映画もそうですけど映像であり音である。なのでなんとなくその言葉が後に気がちなんですけど人の心っていうのは必ず言葉でもあります。
So it might be a little bit of a difficult concept to understand, but when you're creating something and you're thinking about the right way to do it, it's often thought that, movies are made of sound, they're made of visuals, and they also have words, and it's often maybe that words end up coming at the end, but it's really words that move people.
なのでその映画を作るときにまずきっちりこの作品はこういう作品なんだってことを言葉を決めておかないとまずお金を集められない、スタッフを集められない。仮に作り始めたとしてもどんどん作品がブレていきます。
And so it's critical that the right words, the right description is decided upon at the beginning. It's what helps you gather the finance, it's what helps you gather the right staff, it's what helps the work itself from straying from the path.
で最終的にお客さんにそれを届けるとき自分たちの言いたかった言葉をお客さんに届けるためにありとあらゆるプロモーションをします。
And so we concentrate our thoughts and efforts on the right methodology, the right delivery methods to the consumers to make sure that this message is broadcast clearly.
なので僕はプロデューサーに一番必要な資質というのは映像も作らないし音楽も作らないし物語も作るわけじゃない。
So, as a producer, I can't make visuals, I can't make sounds, I can't make movies myself.
ただプロデューサーは今これからみんなが作ろうとしているものを言葉にする。
But the producer does make words.
でそれを全てのスタッフ、全てのお客さんにあまねく伝える。
And so, really, it's my job to make sure that that is clearly and concisely communicated to everyone involved.
でこれがプロデューサーの一番重要な仕事。
And I think that communication is the absolute most critical part of being a good producer.
なので僕はそれこそアメリカでいうとスティーブ・ジョブズさんの本とかは非常にやっぱり何度も読みますね。
So, for me, one of the things I also appreciate is reading books like of Steve Jobs' book. I've read that so many times.
自分たちが作ってるものが何なのか、でそれを極力シンプルにお客さんに伝えて、でそれを欲しいと思ってもらえるかということに関して、スティーブ・ジョブズさんという人は、多分彼が映画をプロデュースしたとしても、彼は多分超一流の人だったんだろうなと気がします。
So I think he was an excellent example of really being able to think about what it is we're making. How do we communicate that, and how do we make sure that it's well received? And even if he was to maybe have made movies, I think he would have been a top class movie maker in that regard.
これが僕らが考えるプロデューサーの仕事です。
So this is what I think being a producer is.
何か質問があったらぜひお願いします。
So at this point, if you guys have any questions for me, I'd love to be able to answer them. Mark.
Getting back to Studio Ghibli and Suzuki, Miyazaki has very famously said he does not think of the international audience when he makes the movies. He's just making it for the Japanese audience. So, but does Suzuki, as the producer, is he thinking about the international audience?
Let me repeat the question so that everybody can hear, just in case. It's been said that director Miyazaki has said that he does not consider international audiences when he makes features or works. He focuses on the domestic market. So my question is, does Mr. Suzuki consider the international audiences when they make the movie?
No, they don't think about international thing. Just they think only domestic thing. But they said domestic is international. This is their philosophy. So if they make international film in Japan, I think they cannot get good successful. 鈴木さんと宮崎さんは常に言うのが、我々は半径3メートルの中で映画を作る。
So they often discuss and say that, you know, when we make films, when we make movies, we do it within a radius of 3 meters.
ただ神山さんとか僕はインターナショナルのことは意識して作るんです。
But in contrast to that, I can tell you that myself and Mr. Kamiyama, we both do make a conscious effort to consider international audiences when we make work as well.
Thank you.
Good question. Another question? Up front?
Yeah, I got a pretty specific question. How did you guys go about deciding for the character designer for Skycrawler, Tetsuya Nishio? I know the director Oshii worked before with Okiura and Kise for his movies, so I was wondering how did you guys decide to pick Nishio for that specific project?
Nishio?
Yeah, Tetsuya.
Okay. The question is, why did you specifically choose Tetsuya Nishio to work on Skycrawlers?
Good question. So the first reason, he wanted to be. So Nishio said to me, I want to be a character designer. And second reason, Mr. Kise and Mr. Okira was a character designer of Ghost in the Shell. But when Mr. Oshii make a new film that Skycrawlers, he said, I want to make young film. I want to tell to not all people, I want to tell young people. So he said, I want to change every staff. I need young staff and young designer and also young producer. So I selected Young, and he's a top animator in production IG. So we selected Mr. Nishio as well.
Question, thank you. Do you have any other questions? Yes.
You mentioned earlier that you want to walk with the money.
I'm sorry, can you speak up? It's really difficult to hear.
I'm sorry. You mentioned when you walked over money from the money people, you couldn't deal with suits. Have you ever had to ask me going out with money people who find out that bigger fans than you are and actually going to be more enthusiastic about watching the people?
I'm terribly sorry.
Crowdsourcing.
Can you-
Asking about crowdsourcing.
No,
Just come up here and
Yeah.
use the microphone, and that way. I'm sorry. The echo is really weird. It's like you can hear myself speak.
I have a soft voice, sorry. What I was asking was, have you ever had in the past where you've gone to the money people, basically, executives, and you come to find out they actually end up being bigger fans than you are, or more possessed by the people?
I got it, yeah. So the question is, when you try to gather sponsorship, funding, money, have you ever come across a case where the top executives of a big corporation that you are asking money from are actually really big fans, bigger fans than you ever expected? Is that a fair?
Yeah.
$009 リサイボールはそうですね。
So as a matter of fact, there is a case that actually happened when we were gathering funding for 009 Recyborg.
Because 009 Recyborgs is has original manga 30 years before. So every executive people loves that original manga. It was very, very easy to make money. For example, in Panasonic is the biggest sponsor of 009 Recyborg. Every executive loves the character and 002, her name is Francoise. It's the first love of executive producers. And there are three. I got it. But any of these was difficult. This is original film.
Good question, interesting question.
Thank you.
All right, we got about 4 more minutes. All right, in the back. Did you have a question? Oh, you just tell me 4 minutes. Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, well, maybe what we'll do is we'll close with, so let me see a show of hands, if I may, of who is planning to see the screening of 009 tonight. Oh, fantastic. About 80% of you. Great.
Okay, so I'm going to explain about 009 Cyborg, okay?
Sure.
So, 009 Cyborg, original manga's title is Cyborg 009. The author is a very, very famous masterpiece in Japan. His name is Shotaro Ishinomori. So he made original manga before 30 years ago. So this is very unique manga. In Cold War, a Russian scientist made cyborg soldier. And 001 is a Russian, 002 is American, 003 is French, 004 and German. No. Yes. And 005 is also American. And 006 Chinese, 007 is, his name is Great Britain. So it's Englishman. And 008 is African. And 009 is half Japanese and half American. So, but they escaped from every scientist and they decide to fight against evil. So in this film, it's after 30 years, so every character back to their home. But this time in 2013, and the terrorism is happening in every countries. For example, Japan, United States, and France, and England, China also. So they back from his country and they fight against new evil. これがあったんです。で、この作品で神山監督がこう伝えようとした非常に大きなテーマというか、やっぱりこう東のエデンの延長上なんですけど、現代における正義とは何かっていうことでした。
So one of the things Director Kamiyama wanted to convey in this particular remake or continuation of 009 is it's really kind of a continuation even of the Eden of the East theme. And that is, what is justice?
例えば、日本から見た敵は、もしかしたら敵から見たら日本が敵かもしれない。
So it really revolves around perspectives. If Japan looks at another country or group as an enemy, perhaps from that group or considered enemy's perspective, Japan is actually the enemy.
もちろんアメリカが敵だと思っている国からすれば、きっとアメリカが敵でしょう。
you know, the countries that consider America an enemy, America probably also considers an enemy.
今の時代というのはもう人間の数だけ正義がある時代だっていうのが神山監督の考えですね。
And so Director Kamiyama's thought is really, there are probably as many different interpretations of what is right and what is just as there are people on the planet.
ですので、この009リサイクルというのは少しちょっと難しいかもしれません。最初は理解する。
So at first it may be a little bit difficult to comprehend the true message in this film 009.
ただ一つその神山監督が何を言いたかったことをご説明すると、とにかく敵と味方がこれだけ分からない時代に何が正義か何が悪かってことを決めるのはおそらく映画を見ている一人一人のマインドであり、ブレインである。
So really what it is the actual person or entity that decides what is good and what is not good, what is evil. It really comes down to each individual's personal interpretation in their heart and in their soul, in their mind.
それを描くために、例えばそのテロリズムだったり、あとは国と国との戦いだったり、あとは脳科学だったり、あとは宗教だったり、現代考えうるいろんなそのパースペクティブをそのことを描くためにこの作品は使っています。
So we're kind of using this to explain that, you know, there's a lot of different perspectives to consider, whether that be religion or, you know, some type of an electronic implant, technology, that allows each individual person to experience what they believe is true and just.
そのことを頭に入れて見ていただくと、神山監督が009リサイクルという作品を使って描こうとしたすごい壮大なテーマがとてもよくわかると思います。
And so I think if you consider this as you watch the film, it might help you in understanding kind of the big grand message that Director Kamiyama is trying to tell you.
このセミナーを今日聞いた方はとてもラッキーだと思います。
So hopefully you consider yourselves a little bit lucky for this information as you go into watching this film. Thank you for that.
こうして作品が言おうとしていることを言葉にしていろんな人に伝えるというのがプロデューサーの一番面白い仕事だと思います。
And so, you know, I think, you know, for me, being a producer, one of the most interesting and fun parts of my job is to be able to turn this type of a message into words and communicate that to everybody.
Thank you very much.
Good job on the English, right? Let's give him a round of applause for being brave enough to say this in English in front of all these people.